Okay, so the next part of the sequence of play after you go through the supply check is you start with the wing initiative roll. This is a step that you're going to return to over and over again until every wing has activated. Now, in the Philadelphia campaign and the New York campaign, in the Trenton campaign, both armies had the same amount of wings. The Monmouth campaign is unique in the fact that the Continentals have more wings. Now, there's a reason I did that. The more die rolls you have to do to determine movement, the less organized it's going to be. In this campaign, even though they're coming out of Valley Forge and the army's been reorganized, you see kind of a little bit of a disconnect between the leadership. Say Charles Lee, which I purposefully left up here in this campaign because he has a negative die roll modifier on movement and his units don't want to get moving. So that's kind of how I simulated that disorganization, is there is a higher chance of movement being different for different parts of the wings because you have a different number of wings. Now, in terms of good gameplay, both sides still have about the same amount of strength. So it turns out working itself out, but what you're going to see is where the British kind of stay more compact and together, the Continentals in this campaign get spread out because the wings are having to move separately rather than having one die roll for a big group. So wing initiative roll, get a 6 and a 1. So the British will get to activate first. On ties, if we ever have a tie, the British always win ties. That's just kind of showing the better organization of the professional army that they had. So now I go ahead and pick which wing I want to activate. Right now I have Kniphausen's wing, which is a green, which you probably cannot see very well. Let's see if I zoom in here. Kniphausen's wing with the green dot. So now anybody that has a green dot is who is going to get the wing, or the amount of movement points that I'm about to roll for. I have to declare what wing I am moving before I make the movement or the base movement roll. So here is the wing movement point chit. I'm going to go ahead and roll 1d6 and I get a 3. The base movement is never impacted other than if it's a series specific rule, such as the Trenton campaign. On a snow movement, the base movement would be impacted. Most movement modifiers are unit by unit. So when I roll that 3, I go ahead and place it on the wing movement track. Everybody in that wing gets 3 movement points. Now that's when we start to see different modifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and move Grant first. He is not next to Kniphausen, so he does not get Kniphausen's movement modifier. But he is in command because he's within 4. So 1, 2, 3. That makes sure that he is in command. The movement or the command range of Kniphausen is determined again by this top left number, which is 4. So Grant is able to move. He adds his fatigue before moving. You'll see his SP marker under there, which means earlier in the campaign he lost some men. He goes 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Now this is where we start to see some stacking. Sorry, it went off the camera a little bit there, amateur YouTuber. Stacking does impact movement unless it is a supply wagon. So this supply wagon is not going to impact anything. If that were to be a regular unit, it would have been +1 to enter that hex. So you start to see, as we do up here, the units start to get spread out as if they're marching in column. Zoom out some. So he is marched down to here and stopped there. Now I go on to Maitland. Maitland is not adjacent to Kniphausen, so he does not get his movement modifier, so he'll be at 4 as well. Go ahead and add fatigue and get ready to move down the road. These light brown roads are just regular trails, are not heavily used roads of the time. You'll see the black road up here. There's a few of those. Those are the main kind of highways that people traveled by at those times. The only real difference is if you're traveling along a black road and all of your movement is on a black road, you get 1+ hex to your movement. So if you were 4 and you started at Bordentown, I go 1, 2, 3, 4. I get to move 1 extra hex as long as it's all on that black road. I have to start on the black road and end on the black road. So back down here to Maitland, he's going to go along the road. 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to stay on the roads. If you get off the roads, movement's doubled for a clear hex. It's 3 movement points to go into a wooded hex. Crossing these creeks and other waterways has a high impact, so staying on the roads is highly influenced. Now, one thing, if you're looking around at the counters, you're going to notice there is no cavalry. That was an extremely tough decision. It may have to be something I input if the system works really well, and I end up getting to say the southern campaigns where cavalry had a little bit more of an impact, having it as a campaign-specific rule. But with that, the units that kind of play the role of the cavalry units are these light units. See if I can get that to focus. Identified by the LT in the bottom right-hand corner. So you'll see these units kind of rushing around a little bit more. They move better off-road. Those clear hexes don't have as much of a negative impact on them. The wooded hexes don't. So those are used pretty well for skirmishing, say, or if you want to do a small flank maneuver. They move much better. They don't have some of the negative movement modifiers that other units do, as you will find out as you go through gameplay. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and continue to move the rest of Kniphausen's wing up this road as we move on to Monmouth. The rest of these units, the Jaegers here, Grant, they are going to get a +1 movement modifier. So instead of that 3, they're going to end up with 4. Well, why? Because they start adjacent to Kniphausen. Now, Grant's going to be kind of in question, though, because if I move Kniphausen first, he has to be adjacent to him at the start of his movement. So if Kniphausen moves first, he is no longer adjacent to him, so he does not get that modifier. You have to be adjacent or stacked with the leader when you start moving in order to get the movement modifier. So that's kind of showing how, even though the wing movement is based on 1 die roll, every single unit still operates individually. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move some of these up, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about what comes next. So back after moving that wing, you'll see Kniphausen's wing has moved quite a bit up the road towards Monmouth. Now, one thing you're probably thinking, each wing movement, or each wing only gets 1 move per turn. So how do you incur more than 1 fatigue level on a clear day if you can only move 1 time per turn? That's where a force march comes into play. So if if Stern wanted to force march because he's fallen a little bit behind because he got off the road and he wants to catch up with Kniphausen, a force march is conducted unit by unit. So instead of rolling a force march for the entire wing, I have to do it unit by unit. This is my way of kind of simulating if a army leader or wing leader is really pushing his men and they have a force march and they're marching a lot during that day, the more likely those men are to get tired and not follow commands perfectly. They may get more disorganized. So you go 1 unit at a time to force march. Now, I could have done that right after a unit's move. So if I move Grant at the front of the column and I get all the way up here and I want to move him again, I could have went ahead and force marched him and tried to get him further. Each force march, of course, incurs more fatigue. You'll see along this road, everybody still stayed pretty spread out, just like they were back at the other part of the road because of that +1 in order to stack. To get to their full movement allowance, they had to stop and they keep going back. Now, before we get to that force march with Stern, what is the stacking rules? So in the American Revolution, or really just any military campaign of that time, you had them marching in column, and then as they got to where they wanted to engage the enemy, they would start to come together. Instead of having one stacking rule based on the strength of the unit or other things, I want something a little bit different, and it's based on your proximity to the enemy. So if you are within 2 hexes of the enemy and from the same wing, the stacking limit is 4 units. Has nothing to do with the SP. I know and how I'm designing it, the SP is tight enough to where you're not going to have very many units that are absolutely huge, and you're not going to end up with these massive stacks, even if it gets up to 4 units. But again, in order to have 4 units, you have to be within 2 hexes of the enemy and from the same wing. If you're from a different wing, the stacking limit is 3. If you're not within 2 hexes of an enemy, the stacking limit is 2. Now, what that ends up forcing into the game as you play through it is these long, drawn-out columns marching down the road. One source that I read on this Monmouth campaign, the British were stretched out by at least 12 miles at one point. So that stacking limit really stretches them out. So not only do you have the 2-unit stacking limit, if you're outside of 2 hexes from the enemy, you also have the +1 in order to stack or go into a hex that's already occupied. So you end up with these long drawn out lines kind of naturally being played into the game. So back to the force march, where we want to get stern caught up with the rest of the wing that's already marched up the road. In order to force march, I'm going to declare the force march with stern. Now, a force march is 1d6 minus 1. That means if I roll a 1, that unit does not get to move. But the gamble I am taking by declaring a force march is I have to add that fatigue before the die roll. So I go ahead and add the fatigue, roll the die. Hey, 4 minus 1 is 3. He's going to move 2 to get back on the road, 2 to get back on the road, and then 1 to move up a little bit more. He could force march again if I wanted him to. In this case, I think he's close enough. I've got him back within command for the start of the next turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he won't have to roll for command on the next turn. And it gets pretty, it's a pretty big gamble to force march the more fatigue they incur. So right now he's at a fatigue level 2. That automatically does a -1 movement point for that unit. So if we were to start the next turn and we have 3 movement points from our wing movement point roll, he would only have 2. Now if we go to a force march, it's 1d6 minus 1. Well, that's an extra -1. So now if I declared it, I'm not going to, but just to show you how it would work, I want to declare a force march. He goes up to 3, but now I have a d6 roll with a -2. Well, we got a 5, so he would have got 3 movement points. But just like on the last roll, if he would have rolled a 2 and had -2, now he's up to a fatigue level 3 and doesn't get to move. So a force march is quite the gamble, and that's why you want to keep the units on the road. Hopefully keep your wings compact and together, because you don't want to get into a situation where your fatigue is slowly growing. Now, I can only force march within that wing's movement turn, or within that wing's activation. So I've already activated that green wing. I have to do all the movement and combat with that wing within that turn, or I don't get to move them again to the next half day. So yes, you can build up fatigue, but if you just do one action, you're probably going to end up with 1. Now, every unit in that wing moved, including the supply, which was here, and then you have one up here at the front. If one decided not to do something, so say Stern was still back here, and he was at 1 fatigue, and he decided not to do something, that is one way you recover fatigue. So if you choose not to perform an action, you recover 1 fatigue. All right, so now that I'm done with that wing, what happens? We go back to the wing initiative roll. So if I can get this up here and it not be blurry. Sequence of play, we did weather determination, the supply check, which isn't in this campaign, wing initiative roll, and then we have our phasing player, which is 1 wing activation. So we have our wing activation, we choose who we want to, which wing we want to activate. We roll for our movement points, and then we go through each unit. Each unit can do different actions. On this unit activation, we didn't see this live because everybody was in command, but that's where we're just checking to make sure every unit's in command. If a unit's not in command, you have to roll. It's 1d6 modified by their morale, which I should have talked about earlier. It's that other number on the unit. You have their SP, you have their morale. The light infantry units have most of the time a higher morale, which allows them to operate out of command more, because you need a 1d6 roll of 4 or higher to activate if you're out of command. So the higher your morale, the more chance you have of getting that number of 4, 5, or 6 on a 1d6 roll. So a lot of those light units have that, and that's why they're good for operating on their own. Kind of like you see Maxwell back here. He is definitely out of command. He is in Washington's wing. Washington's way over here, but he has a positive morale. So every single time that he wants to move within that wing's activation, he's going to have to roll an extra d6 just to be activated. If he fails that roll, he gets marked as out of command. Now, one thing I don't like is that he has to keep rolling over and over again. I had that at first early on in the design, and I took that away. You can only be out of command for one turn in succession. So on the very next turn, he would be able to move, because I don't like the idea of a unit is just setting still for multiple days or multiple turns in a row. Maxwell had enough of, I don't know what word to use, but he would not have just sat still here for days on end. He would have ended up moving and doing something. So you're only going to be out of command for one turn if you roll that. So then we go to repeat steps 3 and 4, and we keep going all the way until every wing has moved. So we just did the first wing, which is the green wing for the British. We'll roll 2d6 again. We have a tie, 2 and 2, which, as I mentioned earlier, will be a British activation. They win all ties. So the tied initiative actually brings into play some rules that I think are really important to go over. So going through the sequence of play again, once you do the wing initiative roll, and the tie gives us the fact that the British are going to be the next up, you go into the activation part of the sequence of play. Let me bring this up on the player aid. Where first you're going to assign the wing MP, but right after you do that, you're going to do unit activation. Now, unit activation up to this point hasn't been something we really had to worry about, because all the units in Knut Pausen's wing were in command. Now, before choosing the wing, I need to still keep that in mind, because it could impact what the next wing can do. And in this case, both wings have kind of a predicament that they have to keep in mind. So it's looking at the black wing first. The black wing is under the army leader, Clinton. So the army leaders do have a wing of their own, and they place others in command. So anybody within 6, identified by the top left number for any leader, anybody within 6 hexes of Clinton is placed in command, regardless of if they're in his wing. So for example, if Grant was outside of Kniphausen's command range during their wing activation, Clinton could place him in command so he could still do something during his wing activation. Clinton cannot place him in command during his wing activation. Only units in his wing can activate during his wing activation. So where's the predicament come here? There's a little bit more to the command structure. Units within a leader's wing have to stay within that leader's command range in order to automatically activate. If they're outside of that leader's command range, then they have to roll to activate. Furthermore, going up the command structure, wing leaders have to stay within the command range of the army leader. Or at least try to. So by try to, what I mean is you did have small occurrences in the Revolution, say the Battle of Brandywine, where Howe makes that flanking march. You didn't have the wide, long mile flank marches like you had in the Civil War, but in the Revolution you did see a little bit of that, but it wasn't as many miles. So what this system does is you can go outside of the command range of the army leader. Or in this case, Clinton has taken himself so far disconnected from the rest of the army on a gamble I made a couple turns ago that came back to bite me in this situation, that the rest of the army leaders are outside of his command range. They do not have to roll or anything to activate their wing, but what they must do is end closer to the leader than how they started their turn. All of that is to put into context the decision that has to be made before deciding which wing to activate. So let's take a look at the two different sides. If I activate Cornwallis's wing, which is the white wing, most of his wing is located right here. Now, he is technically the rear guard at this current state of the campaign, but he is stretched too far away from Clinton. So if I want to do anything with Cornwallis, Cornwallis himself is going to have to start to make his way back towards Clinton. I could still use units under him to, say, attack Maxwell, who's kind of just harassing the rear guard. I could use units under him to go up here and attack the 2nd Maryland if I want to try to distract the rest of the Continental Army to loop back and attack the rear guard. Or I could activate Clinton, bank on his movement modifier, which is +2, helping to get him out of Monmouth, maybe get him connected back, going off the road. But that's a pretty big gamble because he's going to have to use quite a bit of movement points once he goes off the road. It's going to be 2, 4, 6, 7 across the creek. So most likely he would have to force march just to get himself out of there. Units under Clinton in this campaign is only one other unit, which is way back here, the provincials. Now, the reason they are back here is when I made that gamble that I talked about earlier, I'd use Clinton's movement modifier to really make a strong move towards Monmouth, hoping I could get there and entrench before the Continental Army came down. But some bad initiative rolls led to multiple Continental moves in a row, and now you see he's in a really bad spot. The Provincials were left behind to try to slow down the Continentals that were originally coming down this road, and they just turned and went the other way. So what I'm looking at with him is if I activate Clinton's wing, one, it would be to try to get him back to safety, but two, to even move the rest of his wing, which is only one other unit, I'm going to have to roll for command, which means they would have to roll a 4, 5, or 6 on 1d6, and they would get to use their modifier of a +1. And most likely what I would use them for is to come over and harass this part of the Continental line just to slow them down some. The British in this campaign's goal is to get off the map and not have a lot of casualties while doing so. The Continental's goal is to stop them from doing that. So now you can see they're in a pretty good spot, starting to cut off the British Army, who was trying to go this direction. So we're getting to a standstill where things are starting to congregate, and we're probably going to see a rather large engagement. As the British right now, what I'm probably wanting to do is have a little small engagement here or there, try to distract the focus of the Continentals and maybe have them come up to congregate here so I can find some sort of exit. Or even if they come this way, I've got enough days to where I could possibly go back towards the north and get off the map. So kind of a predicament here, but it's also a good spot where it shows some of the command decisions I'm going to have to make. I think what I'm going to go ahead with is activate Clinton to try to get him back to safety. That will get the rest of these units in command, and that might get him a little bit closer to Cornwallis for some later movements. And then see if I can get that provincial in. And though it's probably not the greatest decision right now, I'm going to go ahead, if I have enough movement points and he activates, take him over to attack Scott, and that'd be a good spot to end the video, showing you guys a little bit of combat. So let's go ahead and activate Clinton. When I choose to activate, I go ahead and roll for movement for the entire wing. That is 1d6. I roll a 4. So his wing will have a base movement of 4. So let's start with Clinton and see if I can move him back. Now, on the turn sequence, or the sequence of play, it says unit activation after assigning the wing MP. When I'm playing solo, I kind of go back and forth with these. I know, especially in a small wing, which unit started out within his command range or in command. So when I later get back to the provincials, I can just go ahead and roll for them for command. But for sake of the video, I'll go ahead and stick with the order. I was going to go a little bit out of order, but to show you guys how it goes when working in order, I assigned the wing MP, which was 4. Now I'm at the unit activation. So I look at all units within that black wing, which is under Clinton, and see who I need to place in command. The provincials are the only other one. They are outside that 6 hex command range of Clinton, so they have to roll to be in command. They roll a 4 plus 1 because of their morale, which is a 5, so they will be in command and can perform actions during this activation. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Clinton. He can move 4 plus 2 because of his movement modifier, which is the bottom right. I add my fatigue, so he's going to have 6 movement points. 2, 4, and now he's stuck here and can't move anymore without a forced march. Now I am trying to get him out of this area and back with the rest of the army so he doesn't get encircled. So I'm going to go ahead and force march him. On a force march, you add the fatigue first. But the modifier, keep in mind, the modifier is on the fatigue he started with. So even though I added that fatigue, that modifier does not come yet unless I force march again. So on a force march is a 1d6 roll minus 1. He rolls a 3, so he gets 2 more movement points, but he still gets his movement modifier, so plus 2, so he really gets 4. 3 as the base roll, minus 1 because of the force march, puts it at 2, plus 2 puts it at 4. It's going to be 2 to enter the hex, 1 to cross the creek, that is 3. And at that point, I think I'll just stop there. That gets me close enough to Grant if Varnum decides to do something that they can start to come down and support. Now we go up to provincials. This would be a good spot to where we can hopefully see some combat. So we're at 4 movement points. I'm going to go ahead and start to move him over to Scott. Now you see Scott's starting SP was a 12. But there's something underneath him. I see that it is gray. As the British, I'm not allowed to observe the stack unless I skirmish. So a skirmish, you'll see here in just a minute, is a good way to scout. So I'm going to go ahead and add the fatigue to the provincials. Go 1, 2. That leaves me with 2 movement points left. That's important to note because based on what attack I may decide to do, the movement tells me how much I'm allowed to do. So looking here, declare attack, phasing player declares attack type. It can be prepared, normal, hasty, or skirmish. How many movement points I have left determines what I can do there. Before going into the combat phase though, I can skirmish to see the strength of this unit or any units that may be under that unit in the stack. When you go with the optional rule where this really opens things up and this is turned, I may want to skirmish first to see what they are before I declare attack. So when you become adjacent, you have to stop. Now I could force march to exit being adjacent. You don't have to attack, but you can skirmish. The plus side of the skirmish is there's no real negative to it per se. You don't gain fatigue. It's the only action you do that doesn't gain fatigue. The reason I made that decision is I thought that usually when armies are marching, they had small scouting parties going out around the perimeter checking things. So that's what this would be kind of simulating, is that front of the column going off of the rest of the unit and checking the surrounding area. So that's where we roll in the skirmish table to check and see the strength of the other unit. The only possible negative is when rolling on the skirmish table, if you roll really low, your strength is revealed, and the defending unit can choose to attack you. So say you're doing some scouting with a small unit of a 2, you go and run into another unit that you skirmish with, you want to see how strong they are, maybe for the rest of the column that's coming behind you, and you roll really low. Now you don't get to see their strength, but they see yours, and they can attack you and take advantage of it. So a little bit of a gamble there, but this has not happened very much in the playtesting that I have done. So let's go through and see what a skirmish will do. So I land here, I declare a skirmish. It doesn't add any fatigue and it doesn't take any movement points. And I go to the skirmish table, and it's a roll of 2d6. So I take my 2d6 and I go ahead and roll. And I roll a 7. So a base of a 7 would be a fatigue for the attacker and fatigue for the defender. So both gain fatigue. Now, both would only gain fatigue if there were no modifiers. So a roll of 7 on the skirmish table, looking at the different results, you can either have strength revealed, partial strength revealed, which would mean in a hex with multiple units stacked, only the top unit would be revealed. You could gain fatigue to the attacker or defender, or you could also get to where partial strength or strength is revealed for the attacker and not the defender. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning, you may have to where the defender can attack. So let's look at some modifiers that may adjust our result of a 7. Neither unit are militia, or the attacking unit is not militia. This is important, and it's noted in the rules but not on the player aid. The DRMs are all based on the attacker. Well, why did I do that? Because I don't want any information about the defender to be revealed to the attacker by them skirmishing that isn't a result of the table. So if these units are hidden, I wouldn't want anything to be revealed from the DRMs based on the defender, because that would give you an unfair advantage for skirmishing if they have to tell you, well, it is a militia or they are a light infantry unit. Everything on the DRM has to do with the attacker on the skirmish. In this case, it's not militia. It's not 2 or more units in the defending hex. There's only 1 unit. That extra chit underneath of there is actually just the SP marker. It's not across a creek, not up a slope. This is interesting note here. It's not into effect here, but I do reward attacking units that are below 5 SP. So if you're skirmishing with a smaller unit, that is rewarded. Same with light infantry, and same with the light infantry coming out of a wooded area. So none of that applies here. So we end up with a 7, which all that does is fatigue both sides an extra level. That will help accomplish the goal that I had in this of slowing down the Continentals a little bit by fatiguing Scott before he's done anything. It's hard to record and move these counters around. It does slow the provincials down, which is where, in this case, with it being the AM turn and I have an entire PM turn left, I may choose not to attack. But for sake of the video, I think it'd be good to show the combat sequence. So after I have skirmished, now I decide if I want to attack. Once I decide I want to attack, it goes to the combat sequence. Now in the rulebook, the combat section is probably the most in-depth and long part, but I don't think it's complex. I just wanted to make sure it was very clear what was expected when going through the combat sequence. So let's go ahead and see what a combat sequence would look like. So we have the provincials are going to declare an attack on Scott. The first part of the combat sequence is to declare attack and declare the type of attack. Now I remember when moving, I started with 4 movement points and I had 2 movement points left. So that is enough for me to declare a prepared attack. So I'm going to go ahead and declare a prepared attack by the provincials on Scott. Now the next step in the combat sequence is a retreat before combat. That is where Scott can choose to go ahead and retreat. He does this if we're playing with hidden movement before the strengths are revealed. So the strengths are not revealed until we get to the combat results table where the strengths have to be revealed to find your odds. So at this point, Scott is deciding if he wants to stay or go. Scott's going to go ahead and stay in this case because of what you're going to see in the next part of the combat sequence, where he could possibly pull either one of these units in or both. So he's already a pretty good strength himself. He's a 9. So Scott's going to go ahead and stay put and not retreat before combat. If he had chosen to retreat before combat, it is allowed on a 5+. So this used to be much lower. And what we found in playtesting was it was way too easy to retreat. And if somebody didn't want to fight, they weren't ever going to fight. So it was hard to catch somebody out. So we made it a little bit more difficult. You see the list of DRMs here. I'm not going to go ahead and read through those because it's not happening in the game. But if you want to pause and look at those, you can. Retreat before combat. Scott's going to go ahead and elect not to do that. And then you go on to the artillery bombardment table. Artillery was a tough one to think about here too. There's a lot of games that show this well. I kind of abstracted it. It is a 2d6 die roll, one representing the attacker, one representing the colonial side or continental side or defender in this case. And you roll both of them, and then you find the difference between the two. So you take the attacker minus the defender. Here I rolled a 1 on both, which is a -1 or a +1 to a -1 because 0 falls in between those. So it would be a no effect. So nothing happens here. If the attacker's roll was higher than the defender's roll and you subtract, say, 5, take away 1, then you start to see some modifiers on the CRT or extra fatigue added from the artillery bombardment table. So instead of having a whole nother thing, again, trying to simplify stuff, artillery is thrown in and just a simple die roll as we go through the combat sequence. After we go through that, so we'll have no effect from there. So as of right now, we're only at a prepared attack, which is going to impact the CRT. Nothing from the artillery bombardment table. Next, we go to the assault coordination. Assault coordination is where now Scott can try to choose to bring Poor or North Carolina in. However, he can only do that if a leader is with him. So looking at this in the rules, assault coordination 10.12. When a wing or army commander are involved in a combat, assault coordination may be attempted by either side. So if we look at Scott, he would have to have his wing leader adjacent or in the stack with him. In this case, Lafayette is not close enough, so he's not going to be able to use him, which takes away the option of him bringing more in. He's still going to go ahead and stand pat here. For those of you thinking about grand assaults and what happens whenever you want a multi-hex attack, that's where that comes in. You go through the assault coordination first. If that is achieved, then you move up to the grand assault combat resolution, which is where you have the army leader is close enough and you can do a grand assault coordination. So it's a multi-step thing, very similar, like I talked about in the previous videos, to GCACW, just simplified in a way, multi-steps to get to where you have a massive engagement. So going back to the combat resolution, we have gone through declare attack, we've gone through retreat before combat, the bombardment table, and assault coordination we were not able to do because there was not a leader around. Now we go to the odds determination. This is where the units reveal themselves or reveal what's in the rest of the stack. You get a little bit of a hint playing without the hidden movement because of the starting SP, but both of these have lost some. So you have an 8 and a 9, so we're going to end up with a 1-to-1 here. So 1-to-1 combat. After the odds determination, you go ahead and add fatigue to each unit. For participating in the combat. The reason I do this now is because fatigue could be added from the CRT, so just to keep it simple and not having to go back and think about how much was taken on from the combat, you just add it right off the bat. And then we start to go through the die roll modifiers, which takes us to the player aid. I'm going to zoom back out to show the player aid. The player aid I did try to put in order, at least on the playtest player aid, just may look a lot different. We've gone through declare attack, RBC, assault coordination, artillery bombardment. Then you move on to the back, and now we're on the CRT. We determined it's a 1-to-1. And then you go through the die roll modifiers. We do not have a leader involved. Terrain is not going to play an effect here. The artillery barrage had no effect. No defensive works. The only modifier we're going to have is for the prepared attack, which was a +1. The flank coordination that you see here would come into play if on that assault coordination, if say there was a British player here on the flank and I rolled and achieved them being brought into the battle, that's where you would get the flank coordination. Flank rules are very simple. If you achieve an assault coordination, they're brought in from a flank, it's a +1. Not adding a whole lot of depth there, just trying to keep without taking away too much chrome, keeping things very simple. So we're going to roll on the 1-to-1, 2d6. and you're going to have no modifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and roll those 2d6. And I roll a 10. And I just misspoke. It was a prepared attack, so I +1 for 11. So I look at 11 on the 1-to-1. The left side is the attacker. The right side is the defender. The defender is going to retreat 3 hexes. So I take Scott. Again, hard to navigate. The tweezers and everything. There are some retreat priorities. First priority is away from the attacker. Second priority is to try to go on a road if possible. And the third priority is towards your command. I'm going to go this way, 1, 2 down the road. And staying on the priority of the road, I'm going to go 3. And my command here is backed by Lafayette. But I'm going to go with that second priority first to try to stay on the road. I am not a stickler, as you can see, on little rules like that. Probably the best way to go would have been 1, 2, and then 3 back towards Washington. But for me, that's not taking him 3 away from the attacker. That's only still 2 away. So 1, 2, or 1, 2, and then 3. The attacker can now choose to advance, but he doesn't have to. In this case, I'm going to leave the provincials where they are. And we go to the last step. So again, this is why the section, the combat section is the longest, because there are quite a few steps. But I think each step is fairly simple, and once you get to where you're playing, it goes by fairly quickly. The last step is the casualty table. On the casualty table, it is based on the strength of the lowest strength between the attacker or defender. It doesn't matter which one. And you get some modifiers if you have a 4-to-1, 3-to-1, defending in an entrenched position. So I look at the lowest of the 2 units. Scott was a 9. The provincials were an 8. So we're going to roll on the 6 to 10 column for that 8. So it's the lowest number involved in the combat is what you go based off of. Both sides are going to roll 2d6 to get their result, and then apply the die roll modifiers, which in this case is the +2 or +1 for outnumber side. We're not going to have that, so both will have a unmodified roll of 2d6. The defender, the Continentals in this case, rolled an 8, so you would look on the 8 and the 6 to 10. They lose 1 SP. So that 9 goes down to an 8. And then the provincials rolled a 6. So looking back at this exact same column for a 6, you see it's a 1 as well. So they will also lose a 1. There is not heavy casualties. I actually, as part of my research for this, went through all the engagements, or there was a great resource online that had all the engagement of the American Revolution, and the number involved and the casualties involved. And it was not very high. You did not see large amounts of men being taken out. If you get into a huge engagement, as you can see here, the max is a 25. If you get to where it's 20, the smallest number is 26, then you would roll on the 21 to 25 table the first time, and then both would roll again on the 1 table, and you just get it to where it adds up. But you have to start at the max of 25. You can't say, well, it's 25, so I'm going to roll on the 20 and the 11 to 14, or on the 20 and the 11 to 14 if it's a 24. You have to go all the way up the table. When it maxes out, then you start with your second roll coming from the next part. So that's how combat works. I think we have went through pretty much everything at this point, other than what happens at the end of a turn and we get to fatigue recovery. But this video is getting pretty long for a part 2, so we will stop there. What would end up happening is we go back to the wing initiative. I've moved all of the units in the black. They've conducted all of their actions. We go back to the wing initiative, roll to see. Continentals will be up next, and they've got 5 wings to choose from. If you like the video, go ahead and leave a comment, and if it's a more in-depth playthrough of something you guys want, where you just watch me playing rather than explaining every single rule, definitely something I'd look at doing. So thanks for watching. That's Great Marches of the American Revolution.